Hey, Patreon contributors, thanks for joining us for the spoiler talk for The Fisherman by John Langan. Now we're going to get to talk about all that weird shit that happened in the book that we couldn't talk about over in our normal review.
Cosmic horror is so fucking weird, but I'm a little fascinated with it. I've never spent a lot of time reading like Lovecraftian type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so cool because part of this book, I think for me, what made it creepy and stuff is we never really get any kind of real, genuine explanation of what all this other shit is. Like there's some kind of veiled concepts, like maybe this is hell, like this ocean is really under the, but we just don't get, you know what I mean? We get this bigger story looming, and I think that might be what you were alluding to in the podcast when you were saying like this story takes place even outside the bounds of the 100 years that we're living in.
Yeah, well, it does a great job of just saying, hey, like, it's possible that you couldn't even understand how much there is to say about what's going on, which is cool.
It's interesting, too, because when the story actually ends, so 95% of the way into the book or whatever, so when Abe's story almost comes to an end, there really was no resolution with the fisherman. So you kind of knew if you're reading this on Kindle and you're like, oh, I've got 11% left. Something else is going to happen.
Yeah.
But it's odd. I don't want to say it's odd. It's probably kind of rare for a horror story to not have the villain defeated. Because when we leave this story, nothing has changed.
Right.
So that horror is still out there for the rest of us.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that's the kind of thing with it. Like, there's an ancient and super powerful evil. Is that like it is beyond like the likes of mere mortals to control. Even the goddamn fisherman, who wasn't the real like source of power in the story. It took him centuries to try to get hold of like the power that he was. You know what I'm saying? So like, even the guy who was the ultimate evil in the book was just trying to harness an even greater power that he, didn't have control. It was, So, yeah, it was layers upon layers. This book was a fucking onion.
Abe did not really at all address what I have to imagine is the psychological problems he had from fucking that thing that was his wife. Like, just think about that. This isn't like an uptown hooker in Chicago where you just kind of regret it and you think about it sometimes and you're horrified. Like, you have to imagine that had to take some kind of goddamn toll on this guy.
That he banged a demon fish?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think, all right, and I have to give I have to give credit for John Langan because, like, one of the most, not necessarily horrifying, probably horrifying, but definitely creepiest parts in the book was when, like, after he banged what he thought was his wife, they're laying next to each other, and, like, he realized it's, like, some freaky fish monster, but the fish monster gives that, like satisfied moan.
Yeah.
That shit would be devastating.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
I just made a fish have an orgasm.
Yeah, he shuddered like once, like as they were walking to find Dan and ultimately Dan's wife and kids.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kept thinking like, oh, I know what the last 10% of this book's going to be about, like how he has to have psychiatric help because he can't get this thing out of his head. But lo and behold, we did not go down that route, and this is why you and I don't write books, because we would have spent the first 21% of our book would have been all this shit happens 100 years ago and today, and then 79% would have been this guy seeking psychiatric help for having sex with a demon fish.
Well, let's build on this, because there was a part at the very end that I wasn't really sure about until you just started talking about him banging his fish wife. The final fucking like words in the book.
The fish babies.
The fish babies.
Yeah.
I didn't get that at first. It took this conversation for me to realize that, like, he knocked up Fishwoman.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
I didn't get that when I watched.
I've almost got to think that scene had to be on in Langan's head super early in the book. Like he had to have some kind of outline because the story was very intricate in the way it was told. But he had to be like, yeah, then he's going to realize that she had babies. Right. But that had to be like 10% of the way into the plotting, and he had to figure out how to get it to that part.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you figure out the fish babies when you read it?
Yes.
Damn it. Yeah, I had to
Yeah.
think because like I was going to bring that up as something that I didn't understand. Is like, well, he never had kids. Why would there be kids there?
Hmm.
But it's because he fucked the fish woman.
Right.
That's really
That's what
weird.
happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's another thing that doesn't happen with an uptown Chicago hooker.
They don't have fish babies.
They don't ever have your weird fish babies.
Yeah. Um. So that adds a level of just like weirdness to the book.
But that whole thing, like he's looking, I don't want to say into a puddle because there's flooding, but he's seeing these people and there's just dozens and dozens of them. And he talks about how there's like even more depth and more people like underneath.
Yeah.
And like the implication there is that's where dead people go? Or
Right.
is it that these are just demons harnessing the looks of to lure you in?
The way I took it was that basically it was his way of realizing or being told or discovering that like what happens when you die isn't necessarily just like you go to heaven or you go to hell, like some other fucked up shit that you never expected is what happens. Right?
All the more horrifying.
Yeah. Really fucked up.
Fishing. Who knew? Who knew
right.
that I now have so the Blair Witch Project gave me the excuse to never ever go camping. And now I never ever have to go fishing.
You see, and this circles back around to when we were talking about fears with our latest Halloween episode.
Mm-hmm.
And like the water being fucking terrifying.
It's black water and there's little floaty demon fish that look like people you know in it, then yeah, I'm guessing that's probably true.
Little tadpoles with eyes. Is there other... I don't know if there's much more spoilery stuff to talk about. Is there anything from the past that's spoilery that we should talk about?
I don't know. I really like the Rainer character. And one of the things, I guess, maybe this should be part of the regular episode, but what I liked was that the whole town, all the workers were immigrants, which really lent itself to a couple of things. So it lent itself to that typically people from Europe are a little more superstitious and probably were at that time.
Yeah.
But the whole, like, you would think someone would be like, she's back from the dead. We need to do something. But they were also terrified because they're all immigrants here.
Right. And like, you know, not going to their job would mean that they didn't have a job, and like, you know, drawing the attention of the police would mean that like, you know, something bad might happen to them and stuff. So that was cool because like at the beginning I was like, why don't they just fucking kill that bitch? But
that's why this story couldn't take place in Texas or in Kentucky or whatever, where there weren't you know what I mean, like with cowboys, which would be around the same time frame. It almost has to be immigrants or there would just be a lynch mob.
Right. She'd be gone.
Yeah.
Immediately. Yeah.
So they have to be afraid for their status in the United States or genuine fear for losing their jobs because they're so hard to come by. That keeps everybody in line until Rainer gets his little band of merry men together to go and take care of this zombie woman.
Yeah. And then the whole like it got like, I don't know if the way that it was described, all the weird mystical magical shit that was going on, really set well with me, but the whole time I was like, well, how would you fucking make this happen? And I couldn't find a better way. So I was like, yeah, this is weird, and in points it's a little cheesy, like the weird, what did you call them, the vivid trees and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yep.
But at the same time, I'm like, you wouldn't have been able to fucking tell this story better.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to look at it. It's a funny way to look at it, but yeah.
So yeah, it just got really, and that's the thing, it got really weird. But in a way where it was, again, like I said, just, you know, when you're trying to tell a story about what's supposed to be unfathomable, it's probably going to get a little bit weird. Okay. When Abe follows fake Marie, and they see the statue of the pregnant woman, and there's that old road, and they encounter the man, and then she turns into that really tall, beat-up lady and shouts at him. Were you 100% sure what was going on there?
No, but my inclination was that was the fisherman.
Yes. We later find out it was a fisherman,
Right.
but, like, what I'm confused about is like, so there's a weird thing with time going on, or was that like a vision of a different time, or was that
I
actually
think
him?
I think it was a weird thing with time, and I think that was the fisherman goddamn giving up and her sending him back. Like,
Right.
I think that whatever the creature is that he's trying to rein in probably needs his help to break free.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So it needs the fisherman, and I think the fisherman at some point was like, "Fuck it, I'm done. I've been doing this for a couple hundred years. I'm out of here." And she was like, "Nope, nope, no, you're not. Back to work."
And then he cried and ran away like a bitch.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. Did you have anything from the pregnant statue? I didn't
I
really.
have nothing on the pregnant statue. I had a feeling when I saw that they were going to be going into some kind of, necropolis, some city of the dead, where it was going to be a little more organized than it was, and not just out to the shore. But that didn't materialize. So I was picturing them entering like a kind of Roman area where, like a Colosseum-y type place with all the dead people, and maybe the fisherman is the king there. I wasn't expecting them to go back to the beach.
Right, the beach was a little bit surprising. Oh yeah, the other thing that I thought was interesting that definitely belongs in spoiler talk is now when we get back to the present day in part 3, soon after they're leaving the diner, Abe is kind of talking to Dan about the shit that went down and thinking and reflecting on it himself. And he's thinking about things from the story we read, but then thinking to himself, wait a minute, that wasn't something that Howard said, right? And that happens twice, I believe.
Oh, I forgot all about that. But yeah, that definitely happens.
So and then that plays with the timeline of things, because if Abe knew about that before he tells the story to us, that means, so like for me, I was thinking the climax of the story is going to be like Abe is a reincarnation of someone, or Abe is somehow possessed by a spirit of something that's belonging to this original story or something. And that never played out. So I was kind of wondering, how did Abe know the stuff that he knew before he was supposed to know it? And that I never got a resolution on that.
Now you say that, I'm a little mad about that, because
Right?
I had forgotten about that. But you're right, because that's a dangling thread. So my a couple of quick thoughts now that you just brought it to my attention. One is which I guess they're the same thought, but either all of us know this story, one of those things that's kind of baked into our consciousness, and that's how he pulled it out when faced with it. He had extra information that he wasn't aware he had.
Yeah.
Or the dream that he had about Marie, which is frighteningly similar to what winds up happening later, was him being kind of drawn to it specifically. Yeah. Like maybe not all of us have it, but somehow it was planned at some point that Abe would be one of the people that would come loan his power to the fisherman.
Gotcha.
But it's been planted in his head. And maybe, really now, if we really kind of examine it, maybe that's what happens to everybody whose wife dies. Like that there's a target audience for people who are drawn to this. And it's not, I lost a loved one and, maybe there's a way to bring them back, but that some cosmic horror monster, if you've lost a loved one like that, kind of starts to draw you in a little bit.
So, all right. So building off of what you're saying, and we're basically just rewriting the story for John Langan now. If I'm the fisherman and I need help, I need other people's energy, which we discover that at the end of the story he does. I've gone through the loss of my family in a very tragic way, to the Turks, which I've talked about. Dude, this is like reinforcing my thing where like everybody at some point suffered from the Turks being dickheads. I lost my family, so I have some sort of weird like psychic connection to, or it's easier for me to reach out to people who have gone through a similar tragedy, and I plant things in their mind that will bring them to me, like that kind of thing.
Almost, but flip your thinking. Okay, remember what I said. We think the fisherman is trying to harness this power, but I think, now that we think about it towards the end, I think the monster needs people to let it.
Oh, so the fisherman is he is equal with Abe or Dan.
Right, but he's the one that was brought in and given the special skills or the knowledge that he found in those books way back when.
Gotcha.
but it's easy for him for that monster to draw on people, because when you look at it, you've got the fisherman whose wife died tragically, was killed by the Turks. He's the ringleader, right? He shows up right around the time that the rich guy's wife dies. He ropes the rich guy in for finances and stuff, right? The next guy is the neighbor whose wife dies, whose wife is reincarnated. He gets drawn in, and then we skip forward to Dan being drawn in, and ultimately, now that we've talked this through, Abe also somehow being drawn in. Because remember, Abe's like, I had no real reason to pick up the fishing pole. Just one day I decided I needed to go fishing.
Yep.
So I think that he was drawn in, and maybe anybody who loses, very specifically a wife, it seems like, because there were no women drawn into this to get their husbands back. So maybe anybody who loses their wife becomes susceptible to seeking this creature out.
See, and that's a flaw. That's why the whole thing doesn't work. This goddamn creature needs to figure out its business plan a little better, because, like, if it's the same thing as royalty. Like, if you keep breeding the same bloodline, eventually it's just going to get worse and worse. Like, if you just keep plucking, wife losers, you're not pulling from, like, the best, like, group of people. You're narrowing your resources unnecessarily.
I'm guessing it must draw off some kind of sorrow or something, but I do think you're right. I think we just rewrote John Langan's book in a better version of it.
Well, I hope John Langan decides to give us $1 a month so you can hear our thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'm a little upset, and we're going to talk about this. I'm upset because you and I had to go a really long way to explain, and we can't do it because it's very spoilery, but we have to go a really long way in a conversation to explain what started out as a hole or a dangling thread in the plot.
Yeah.
And I think this kind of covers it.
It could.
But we shouldn't have done this work, because if I read this book on my own, I would have put it down. And if I would have thought about it, I'd been like, God damn it, why wasn't that ever really brought up?
Yeah.
Well, and I never would have worked to this conclusion. So
Yeah. There was just a couple of things in the book that bothered me, and that was one of them. The other one was I found 2 different typos. So, spoiler.
I know I found one.
Yeah, spoiler,
towards the
there's
end.
2 typos. Both of them are in part 3. So I think that whoever was editing this edited it in one quick read and missed some shit at the end.
I don't really fall. I mean, that doesn't take away from the story for me.
Not at all.
So.
No. Nope.
All right. Thanks for listening to this edition of Spoiler Talk, where we rewrite the books the way we want to read them. That's really what Spoiler Talk should be from now on. We did this recently, too. I think that we talked about a book, and I was like, what would have been better? And we talked for a long time about, like, I don't remember which one it was, but you remember what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
So that's what Spoiler Talk is. So thanks for your contribution. Thanks for listening to Spoiler Talk. We're gonna head back over to the book to wrap this bad boy up.